Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Director Bishotsky, Chair of the Governor's Water Policy Council. Welcome, everyone. As is our usual operation, I'm going to send this over to Trent Blumberg to go over some of the logistics and to call the roll. I hope that you all have all the tryptophan out of your system because we have a lot of really important information and a good discussion of our successful rulemaking on ADOS for today. So a bit of a celebration there. And moving on to the next important item that was discussed in the council. So Trent, go ahead.
Natalie, if you want to move the slide forward one. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making it in today. So just to run through some of the logistics, since it's been a little while, please note that this meeting is being broadcast via webinar and is being recorded. The recording and all the materials will be posted to the council's webpage. Only members of the council will be able to unmute themselves and participate. For those in the room, please make sure to unmute the mic. Regardless of the kind you have, please make sure to unmute them and talk directly into them so everyone in the room and online can hear. Those participating online, obviously make sure to unmute as well. And for anyone listening in, if you have technical issues, please call ADWR Help Desk at 602-771-8444 or email tickets@azwater.gov. And now I will do the roll call for today's meeting. Please let us know if you are here, an alternate, or online. Patrick Adams.
Present.
Bitta Becker.
Present.
Paul Brierly.
Present.
Brenda Berman.
Here.
Cynthia Campbell. Ed Curry.
Ed alerted me that he had some traffic, but he'll be here shortly.
Thanks. Maria Dadgar.
Present.
Ron Doba.
Present.
Doug Dunham. Sandy Faberts. Kathy Ferris. Chairwoman Amelia Flores. Representative Gail Griffin. Spencer Camps. Jamie Kelly.
Present.
John Kamik. Stephanie Knight Dubian.
Matt Bear is alternate.
Chris Custis.
Present.
Governor Stephen Rowe Lewis.
Present.
Sharon Magdal. Leslie Myers.
Present.
Chairman Robert Miguel. Joe Olson.
Present.
Haley Paul.
Here.
Karen Peters.
Present.
Sarah Porter. Clark Princell.
Here.
Robin Sahid.
Present online.
Joe Singleton.
Here.
Abe Springer. Craig Sullivan. Senator Priya Sundaresan.
Here.
Warren Tenney.
Here.
Tom Torres.
Here.
Representative Stacy Travers. Sandra Watson. And I will note Ed Curry has arrived as well. That's it. Thank you, everyone. And just one last call for anyone on the council who's online who wasn't able to make their presence known during the roll call. So, just for the record, Sharon Magdal's listening in, and we will make sure she's able to speak. Anyone else? Thank you.
Thanks, Trent. So we have the first agenda item up, welcoming and opening remarks, and we're partway through that. I wanted to give Patrick Adams a chance to give some of the opening remarks, and then I'll follow on.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see everybody for those who are joining us in person and virtually. We are 6 minutes in, and I have not received any text messages of folks online who can't hear. So Sharon Magdal as an exception to that, not being able to get in yet. So I'll take that as a good sign for today. I'll be brief, but just want to thank everybody and congratulate the Water Policy Council on the successful passage of the Alternative Path to Designation, or ADOS rulemaking, which became effective last Monday. The council had a hard task in front of it last spring when Governor Hobbs convened this group and finding policy solutions to address groundwater challenges that we've been grappling with in central Arizona for many years. And on top of that, a very quick turnaround, developing solutions by the end of 2023, put a lot of pressure on this group. But this council was up to the task, and we now have a program that'll pave the way for not only more sustainable groundwater use, but continued facilitated economic growth, ending a long period in the case of the Phoenix AMA since the year 2000, where new water providers have been unable to achieve a 100-year designation of assured water supply. It's a big moment. It's really remarkable to have a public policy process where it conceived of, developed, and implemented a new and important water policy like this so rapidly and so effectively. So congratulations to you all. While this is a big moment for the council, we still have more work to do. So today we'll also be taking some time to focus on another assured water supply policy measure that was brought up in this body and discussed last year. Didn't quite make it across the finish line, and so there's more work to be done. This is the ag to urban concept, and we're going to be talking today about where we have opportunities to make progress and move that concept forward as well into the future. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Chair Bishotsky and we can get started.
Thanks, Patrick. So this is a bit of a celebration, this second agenda item on the alternative designation rulemaking. So I will say for me, I have been involved in a lot of discussions over the years, proposing new policy prescriptions, improving the groundwater code. And I'm happy to report that we actually got something done, something implemented, something through, because so often we get almost to that brink and never quite get across the finish line. It was only about a year ago, November 29th, when the recommendation came out of the council. And in less than a year, November 22nd, we got the ADOS rulemaking completely approved and effective immediately, given the vote at the Governor's Regulatory Review Council meeting. Again, we're incredibly proud of the work done by this council, by the department staff, and the stakeholders to achieve this significant improvement to the groundwater code. As Patrick mentioned, we're going to talk about maybe the next in line new policy prescription, and that is the ag to urban concept. There's much work to do there still. Today, we're going to provide an overview of the current status of this potential program as we prepare to initiate a broader stakeholder participation process to firm up the details. So let's talk a little bit about ADOS. Again, we know we needed to address serious challenges revealed by the assured water supply modeling projections. We needed to allow for responsible development. We needed to preserve the integrity of the assured water supply program. We need to continue to protect consumers and aquifers and to reduce total groundwater demand. And ADOS did all of those things, which is no small task. So the ADOS timeline, and a lot of work went into these rules, came out of the recommendation from this council on November 29th of 2023. DWR led a robust stakeholder and public process to assess the criteria for ADOS and to move ADOS through the formal, the informal portions of the rulemaking process. I'm not going to go through every bullet on this slide, but it's a good reference document for all of you to keep in mind. Again, even with so much public participation and opportunity for input, because of robust discussion, GERC, in the rulemaking process that extend the normal timeline to allow for even more stakeholder comments on these rules. I think it was very important that we got as much information out to the Regulatory Review Council, gave as many people an opportunity to provide comment to the council, the Regulatory Review Council. I think everybody had that opportunity. My staff met with just about everyone who was involved in that process in one way or another, and sometimes in multiple meetings, to make sure we were giving voice to all of the issues, the concerns, and coming up with a successful rulemaking program. Again, the rules were passed on the 22nd of November, and the rules became effective 3 days later on November 25th. So they are in effect today, and I'm happy to say we will be accepting applications for any and all of those who want to move forward. We know we've already been contacted by several entities, including the Arizona Water Company, EPCOR. We've had discussions, I think, with Queen Creek and Buckeye to some degree as well. So we will try to expedite these applications, kind of move them as far up the list as we can, try to bring those applications to closure as soon as we possibly can. Again, this rule represents one of the most impactful improvements to the groundwater code. Most importantly, it reduces groundwater pumping and brings in new water supplies for growth. It also brings more water users under the assured water supply umbrella, meaning a century's worth of water for more than just subdivisions. The program facilitates continued flexible growth where in places where groundwater storage has otherwise made development impossible. Program reduces barriers to designations. We believe the designations are the gold standard of the assured water supply program. Instead of requiring a developer to pay the costs of the legacy pumping, the ADOS groundwater allowance provides an achievable option for providers. This program expedites future designation modification applications when adding new supplies. So again, overall, we've checked all the boxes for this program. We have shown with data that it is going to make a positive impact on the aquifer moving forward over the 100 years. It is accessible in both the Phoenix AMA and the Pinal AMA, knowing that in both places, recent Phoenix AMA and Pinal AMA groundwater modeling showed unmet demand and other issues stopping further growth on groundwater. So one tool of many that we need moving forward to address our sustainable water future. So the next one that's up for consideration earlier, this ag to urban concept. And again, today we are reporting on the current state of work on the ag to urban concept. There's still much to do, but we are providing an overview of the status as the department prepares, again, initiate a broader stakeholder process that uses the council input, but goes beyond just Governor's Water Policy Council. Building on the success of ADOS, development and implementation, an ag to urban program will be the next step in strengthening and improving the groundwater code and regulations. So the concept, again, it would be a voluntary program. Again, it needs to show a reduction in groundwater use. It would convert former agricultural lands to allow for development moving forward and create a net benefit to the aquifer. As I have said in prior meetings of this group and in prior meetings about the ag to urban concept, we are, for better or worse, in an era of limits, but we're not in an era of austerity. A properly designed framework for an ag to urban proposal can allow for responsible growth while still reducing water use. As most of you know, again, there's unmet demand in the Pinal and Phoenix active management areas, and along with current shortages in Colorado River water deliveries. Unfortunately, we know that deeper Colorado River shortages are in our future. These issues are creating significant difficulties for farmers, developers, and home builders. The Assured Water Supply Program does not allow new development when there is unmet demand. That is what the Assured Water Supply Program is supposed to do, ensure sustainable development and protect consumers. When done right, the ag to urban concept will preserve the protections of the Assured Water Supply Program while providing flexibility through a new voluntary mechanism for farmers, developers, and home builders to reduce overall water use, reduce groundwater mining, reduce irrigation grandfather rights, develop on former ag lands, and increase replenishment in the Phoenix and Pinal active management areas. However, careful analysis has shown us that proper guardrails are vital to ensure that we meet all of our goals. We shared this, I think, in the past with all of you. And this is just a high-level overview of the opportunity for water savings under this program. So in the Phoenix Active Management area, there are currently 139,000 acres of irrigation acres with a total water use of about 508,000 acre feet a year. The Canal Active Management area is 245,000 irrigation acres with 576,000 acre feet per year of water use. So again, this program, when done correctly, has opportunity to create some overall water savings for our future. Again, this slide is really the general overview of what those opportunities look like at a gross level. I mentioned earlier that to make this a successful program, we need to talk about potential guardrails. And this slide does show 7 of those guardrails. They include land eligibility, consumer protection, portability of credits from agricultural lands, program timeframes, limiting the program to designations of assured water supply, and then requiring conservation measures and conversion rates and replenishment. We're going to go through each one of these potential guardrails one at a time and provide some more thoughts and some more detail on each one of them. So first, land eligibility. This was a very important issue back in the spring. There must be a proven irrigation history in 3 of the prior 5 years. Again, not all ag lands will be eligible, but this is one of the criteria. You also cannot have an existing certificate of assured water supply. The first criteria, water use with a 3 to 5 year history, helps ensure that we are not creating new demands that didn't already exist. And it's also consistent with the history of use requirements for Colorado River transfers and Colorado River conservation programs and Colorado River marketing programs within the lower basin of the Colorado River. For lands with existing certificates of assured water supply, those lands have already demonstrated all assured water supply criteria. The program doesn't allow for those who have demonstrated physical availability to gain additional credits. And I would just ask you to hold questions till the end of this presentation. We'll be able to go back to any and all of these slides. But it's good to look at everything as a whole before we get into individual questions and comments. So this graphic here just kind of visually shows what we mean with these former ag lands. In the green, you see active agriculture. Those are eligible lands under this program. In the hatched pink, where there are certificates of assured water supply, those lands are not eligible. Of course, in some situations, we've already developed residential land, some of that on former farmland, some of it not. Obviously, we don't need this program for lands that already have a residential development on them. So moving to the next guardrail discussion, protecting consumers. This program requires a consumer protection review for ag to urban participation. The standard assured water supply requirements still apply, and that is continuous and legal water availability, water quality considerations, financial capability, and consistency with active management area goals and the plan. Again, this guardrail comes out of the need for proper consumer protections, hallmark of the overall assured water supply program. In terms of additional consumer protection review, we'll cover that in some of the next slides. And again, we're not doing away with any of the existing criteria under the assured water supply program. So this slide will get into some of the guts of the consumer protection review process. So this protection review is really about making sure that there's water in the location of pumping. It is not about where you're going to build. See in bullet number 1, assured water supply modeling results will be reviewed for applications proposing to use exemption credits. That's what we're calling the converted water, to help ensure that water will be available to serve the new municipal demands. The assured water supply applicant must show that the wells used to serve the municipal uses will not exceed depth to water requirements or have unmet water demands during the 100-year period. DWR will not consider any exceedances of the depth to water limit or unmet demands in other cells of the model in the consumer protection review. And that is the key to making this work. Again, currently unmet demand or depth exceedances anywhere in the model domain will stop approval of assured water supply. Here we're looking at a more discrete area, the actual modeling cells. The next bullet, for wells within 1 mile of the wells used to serve the irrigation grandfather lands, right lands historically, DWR will review its most recent assured water supply model projection runs for the consumer protection review process. If the municipal uses will be served by wells more than 1 mile from the wells used to serve the irrigation grandfather right, assured water supply applicant must submit an independent model run. Any model run submitted by the assured water supply applicant may only change the location and volume of withdrawals for the project. So summarizing, and I know this will be a question, you're all probably thinking, what must an independent model run show when you when you propose serving by wells more than 1 mile from the grandfather right? So what must be shown is if the well is put in a different cell, the depth to water is still not forecast to exceed the depth to water requirement. When the pumping moves, that water will still be available at the new location. Again, this is about water. So we'll move on to the next guardrail, or the next element of consumer protection review, the timing. At the time of relinquishment, DWR will review based on existing withdrawal locations or the irrigation grandfather right, the most recent assured water supply model projection run, determine whether these model cells will exceed the depth to water requirement or will have unmet demand. This determination will be included in the relinquishment/exemption decision is valid for 2 years afterwards. If an assured water supply application relying on exemption credit is submitted more than 2 years after the relinquishment, or is using wells more than 1 mile from the wells used to serve the IGFR, assured water supply application is subject to consumer protection review during assured water supply application process. So to kind of depict graphically here what all of this means. Again, using assured water supply model results, wells for the development cannot exceed the depth of water requirement or have unmet demand in the cell, and the decision at the time of relinquishment is valid for 2 years. So this map is illustrative of a depth to water test. It does not at this point include an unmet demand test, but both would need to be satisfied. In our continuing look at these issues, we can talk more about what the unmet demand test might look like in a map form like this map here. This is just depth to water. So again, the question would be, does the depth to water exceed the depth to water requirement in either AMA, then it would be ineligible. In this instance, if you look at the far right and in the upper right-hand corner, that dark red color is less than 1,000 feet, or sorry, greater than 1,000 feet, low land surface, and in the Phoenix AMA, those wells would not be eligible to pump water under this program. So moving on to the next guardrail category, portability. And essentially the question here is, can you build outside of the footprint of the agricultural land? We will have to talk a lot more about this element of the program, but I think is an important one. Some discussion of this in the spring and in our June meeting. I think there are lots of divergent views about this particular issue. I think this will be an interesting one to work through in our stakeholder process. But again, to illustrate perhaps the impact of different outcomes of portability, again, without making any proposal, we have put these maps together with Phoenix AMA. You can see on the left, it's the West Valley, and on the right, East Valley. The yellow on this map are agricultural rights with a 3 out of 5 year use history as of 2022 in the volume of 139,000 acres. The pink is a 1 mile buffer outside of irrigation grandfather right boundary. So you can see how the area expands. And then the red is that 1 mile buffer and any parcel overlapping the 1 mile buffer. So if any of the parcel is in any part of the 1 mile buffer, it can then extend out to the rest of that parcel. So again, what that results in acreage is under, again, the yellow acres with a 3 to 5 year history is 139,000 acres. When you add just the 1 mile buffer, you go up 370,000 acres cumulative, and then adding in the extension of the parcels, another 39,000 acres. So you're looking at a potential developable area, so to speak, of 448,000 acres of land. Again, this is kind of a range of what this could look like. Don't have what we do with the next slide. The next slide will go to Pinal. And similar construct of the map on this slide. Again, with just the IGFR areas, it's 245,000, expanding out to 306,000, and 119,000, adding the parcels for a total of 670,000 in round numbers, acres of developable land. So again, pretty big range there. Just sticking to the IGFRs, we're doing a parcel overlapping buffer as shown on this map. So again, moving on to the next sideboard. Program timeframe. And a defined timeframe for the program creates an opportunity to evaluate policy outcomes. And a sunset or reevaluation date for the program and the exemption credits allow for review of program guardrails and water savings. Again, this is a brand new program that has lots of moving pieces to it. So it seems reasonable to talk about time frame in which we can assess the program at some future date, do course corrections as we learn how the program is working well, where it's working well, and maybe where it's not working so well. Try to get the best possible outcome, kind of the biggest bang for the buck. So I mentioned earlier that this program would only apply to assured water supply designations. We have already seen some requests by potential ADOS applicants to link ag to urban into their ADOS applications and into their ADOS designations. And designations, limiting this to designations ensures that an ag to urban program doesn't only go to residential growth, while unreplenished commercial and industrial use continues to occur nearby and outside of the assured water supply program. Instead, through the designation process, all water users are brought under the assured water supply umbrella. And we've already seen in the ADOS program the benefits that creates long-term for the aquifer and the flexibility that that benefit can create in building a program like the ADOS program, but on also building this ag to urban program. So this next guardrail entitled Development Conservation Measures. So we're looking at potentially including some limitations and back to the era of limits and stretching our water supplies as far as we can. So again, limitations on lakes, limitations on non-functional turf, and there may be some other ideas about how enhanced and very aggressive conservation can create benefit for this. We have seen this take place, at least in other areas of the lower basin, the Colorado River in California, Nevada. So this is a really important piece of this puzzle to me. It's time we really have a serious talk about upping our conservation game, even though we've done a lot of great things through the groundwater code and in other voluntary ways in our state. So conversion rates and replenishment. Program conversion rate limits are needed to ensure the program reduces water use compared to the status quo. And conversion rates will vary between the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs. We're going to walk through the department's refined analysis showing projected agricultural water use and recharge over time under the status quo in the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs. We're going to compare these analyses to projected water use under an ag to urban program. By changing the applicable ag to urban conversion rates in each AMA, we can identify whether water is saved over a 100-year period as well as year to year. These analyses are especially helpful in helping us to identify kind of time limits should apply that protect unintended consequences, like a potential increased groundwater use. We all know that the AMAs are different. The condition of the aquifers in those AMAs are different. A common conversion rate is not appropriate under this program, as I mentioned previously. So development with a low conversion rate is already possible. We've already seen some low development rates. In Phoenix AMA, for example, 76% of the water providers use less than 1 acre-foot per acre across their footprint. Trial Center, thanks to the Center for Information, estimates acre-foot per acre of water use is used outside of the Salt River Project service area lands on the footprints of those areas, Phoenix active management areas. So I think we've seen that development with these ballpark numbers can work because it's already working. Again, our enhanced stakeholder process is going to have to address this issue. I think this will also be one of very lively conversations as we move through that process. So again, I mentioned that we have some analyses that we want to share with you. So we've created a dashboard to go through some of this data and to help summarize and visualize the analyses that have been conducted. And I'm going to hand this presentation off to Natalie to go through the dashboard. Natalie?
Thanks, Tom. For those of you who might not know me, my name is Natalie Mast. I'm the Active Management Area Director here at ADWR. What we're going to be going through today is really just a visual representation of a lot of the analysis that we've been doing over the months. So what I'll do is I will walk through kind of the basics of the dashboard, what it looks like, what the different pieces represent, and then I'll actually pull it up and do a little bit of some examples, walk through some examples of the analyses that you can view in the dashboard. I'll note this again later. We will have the dashboard available online, so you all will be able to click through it, play around with the data in there. And we also will be posting a downloadable data set of kind of the underlying tabular data for that dashboard. Oops. All right. So what this dashboard shows is really a sample of the projections that ADWR has been working through to better understand what the potential impacts of this program would be. It is interactive, so we do have kind of selectable assumptions related to 2 different parameters here, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But you will be able to kind of toggle between different scenarios to kind of better understand the impacts of some of these items on the dashboard. What we show on the dashboard is a lot of different things, and I'll talk through this a little bit more slowly, but I wanted to kind of give a quick overview before we get into the details. So on the left, you have 3 different graphs that kind of compare different scenarios. So the very top chart on the left is a status quo scenario. So this just imagines if we keep doing what we're doing, then this is kind of what it looks like. There's no municipal development on agricultural lands or no additional groundwater use associated with agricultural lands. And kind of according to the historical trends, ag water use declines over time. What you'll notice is that there are kind of bars going up and bars going down. And what we're really kind of trying to understand here is where is the balance between those things? And I'll talk through that in a little bit more detail to what those different components are. On the top right there, you can see where I talked about you can select different pieces of different assumptions to kind of mix and match and select which scenario you like, a little choose your own adventure there. And then on the bottom right-hand corner, we have a total there, and I'll talk through that graphic a little bit too, but really that graphic just shows you the sums of the middle chart there, which I actually skipped over. I'm gonna back up. That bottom right-hand chart just shows you the 100-year total of all of those components. So back to the left, the top chart shows you status quo, no program. The middle chart shows okay, you've got your selections. This is what would happen with a program where municipal development occurs on agricultural lands over time. And then the bottom shows really just the comparison of those first two charts. Okay, we take the balance line of the top chart, we take the balance line of the middle chart, and what do those two things look like compared to each other? I'm going to walk through that a little bit more slowly with some different slides because I know that was quick and it's really hard to see. So, the specific inputs. So this dashboard works only if you select one item, one selection from each of these two assumptions. So the two individual parameters that we built into this dashboard, one is the conversion rate that Tom was talking about. This is the acre foot per acre value for the physical availability exemption credits that would be created under this program. So for each acre of ag land that gets retired, you would get a certain amount of acre feet per acre of physical availability exemption credits, and that's where you select what that number is. For replenishment, we also have some different selections here. So one item says CAGRD 2015, and that just kind of follows the general trend line that was laid out in the CAGRD's 2015 plan of operation when they were forecasting replenishment obligations then. The other option is just a proportion. So you can choose whether to have a 0% replenishment, a 33% replenishment, a 67% replenishment, or 100% replenishment, and just kind of toggle through those to see what the impact of replenishment is in the different scenarios, and also see what the total replenishment obligation over time might be. There we go. So, I talked about that top chart. So kind of, again, stepping through the different components before we go to the live dashboard. The status quo chart. What I'd like to point out here is that we've got a zero line where the dark blue and the light blue meet. You've got a zero line there. And what this is really showing is comparing water uses, water demands to offsets. So in the dark blue, we have agricultural water use. That's our water demand. And in light blue, we have our agricultural incidental recharge. So that's kind of the offset to that agricultural water use. So what we're really interested in here is the impact on the aquifer. So we're really interested in the net water use here. So part of this projection is that we did include some industrial water use. As ag lands go vacant, we don't necessarily assume that they're all going to stay vacant. So we used some AMA data that we have right now to apply a small amount of industrial water use to some of those vacant ag lands. So you do see industrial water use as a demand on this as well. The green line represents the balance. So when you take your demands and you subtract out any offsets, the green line just represents what that net water use is. When you're looking at the projections dashboard, it's really the same concept. You see your zero line, you see your dark blue for the agricultural water use, the light blue for the incidental recharge, but with the program, we are starting to track municipal water use coming in. So what you start to see with the pink is that municipal water use coming in and starting to replace agricultural water use. With municipal water use, you also get municipal incidental recharge and you get replenishment. So depending on which specific filters you choose in those assumptions selectors, that these two items in particular will change so that it will automatically adjust, automatically recalculate, automatically show your new graph and your new balance on that thing. All right. Oops, I'm not really sure. There we go. We put some animations in. Good. All right. So finally, the 100-year total. So it's really helpful to look at these time series and kind of understand how things change over time. You see the agricultural water use going down, you see the municipal water use coming up, but it's also important for us to understand whether, as a whole, whether the program would save water as compared to the status quo. Over the 100-year period, we want to make sure that this program would use less water, would represent a less of a draw on the aquifer, that there's actually a benefit to the aquifer associated with this program. So this is really what this part of the dashboard is looking at, is if I look at all of those bars, that 100 years worth of bars in total, is it actually less? So you'll see that one of these sets of bar charts is a status quo, no program. I know that's really small. It's a little easier to see on the actual dashboard. And the one on the right is with the program. So again, this is that you've got that 0 line where the dark blue and the light blue meet. And so it's still reflecting in the same way as those time series charts, it's still reflecting those demands and those offsets, but it's just showing it in a totaled manner. And so you can see a little more clearly with the total on top there that I know is maybe hard to see here, but it's also easier to see on the dashboard. You can see in comparing the number that is the total on the top of those bars, you can see that with whatever parameters we put in for this particular screenshot, that the program in this example would use less water over the 100-year period than the status quo. This isn't the entire story though, and that's why we have so many kind of pieces of imagery on this dashboard, is to make sure that we can understand both the time series and that 100-year total. So the last chart that we have on the dashboard is a simple comparison of the two kind of balance lines. So if you remember the way the dashboard was laid out, the top chart was a status quo projection, the middle one was with the program. This just takes the balance line from those two charts and puts it on one graph so that you can more easily compare what those balances look like. What we want to make sure is that the program line is less than the status quo line. And something we have seen in certain scenarios is that the total might be less than the status quo line, but at some point in the future, like in this example, it might cross. And toward the end of the projection period, you might see the program actually using more water than the status quo. So those are things that we kind of want to take in context. It's just something we wanted to kind of note as a part of the dashboard and make sure that we had that information available. All right, give me one moment here while I pull up the dashboard to from here. And okay, so I know you can't read this, but I just wanted to point out a little bit of the functionality of the dashboard. There is a kind of explainer tab on the dashboard. Really what this says is make sure you select one of each in your two assumptions categories. If you select multiple in each category, you'll get bad results. If you don't select anything, you'll get bad results. So just select one item out of each of the two categories. This also notes a little bit of some of the standard assumptions that go into the underlying data. I'm not going to get into that too much today. As we're having a further stakeholder process, I am sure we will be getting into a lot of those things. But we do note some of those underlying assumptions on the kind of explainer page for this dashboard. So we have basically three tabs on this dashboard. We've got that explainer tab, we've got a Phoenix AMA tab, and we have a Pinal tab. I'm going to start on the Phoenix tab. And again, you can see our status quo, our projected water use over time, and our net water use comparison. So what I have here right now Right now, I'm just using the CAGRD 2015 replenishment rate, and I have this set at 1 acre foot per acre for the conversion rate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to start at 2 acre feet per acre. There's been a lot of conversation about the appropriate replenishment rate, that type of thing. What we really want to do is provide this information, make this available so that folks can play around with these values themselves and better understand what the impacts of different parameters are on the actual results of the data. So if we look at, let's leave it at CAGRD 2015. If we look at 2 acre feet per acre, using those 2015 forecasts, then we would see actually higher water use. This says 17.2 million acre feet of total water use associated with the program, as compared to 15.1 total water use in our status quo scenario. So that would be a place where ADWR would have concerns seeing that a potential program under those parameters, under that type of analysis, wouldn't necessarily work. When we go to 1.5, you see that, okay, we have status quo is now at 15.1, program is at 12.7. So that's an improvement. That's a fairly significant improvement with the program. But you can also see, and I'm going to expand this a little bit, that our status quo line ends up dipping below the program line over time. With a 1 acre foot per acre program rate or conversion rate, you see that those lines don't actually end up crossing in the projection period. So those are things that we may want to consider as we're considering these guardrails that Tom was talking through earlier in the meeting. So we have different replenishment rates built into the dashboard as well. Part of this is to enable this to be a little bit illustrative. The CAGRD projections, plan of operation forecasts are created for a really specific purpose that are not necessarily, that don't necessarily fit the purpose that we're using them for. So we also took the municipal water use and just looked at different rates of replenishment. So 0%, 33%, 67%, 100%, so that you can kind of understand what the different rates of replenishment might do. So kind of going through that same series, you can see a program that uses less water under all scenarios, no matter your conversion rate. But as I click through those, you can see really substantial changes to the total amount of replenishment that might be required of the CAGRD under those different conversion rates, from 19 million under a 2 acre feet per acre assumption to 14 million under a 1.5 acre foot per acre assumption, to 9 million under a 1 acre foot per acre assumption. So we'd also want to keep in mind those replenishment obligations that could be created under this type of a program. The program would still require that municipal water use be made consistent with the management goal. And replenishment is one way that that can be done. Obviously, there are groundwater allowances and incidental recharge and extinguishment credits that can also contribute to making things consistent with the goal. So 100% is on the very high end of what we would typically expect on actual replenishment. Okay, so this is all Phoenix AMA. We also have the same layout for the Pinal AMA. Again, same replenishment rate assumptions. And as Tom said, we do have some different program rate or conversion rate parameters here for Pinal. Pinal is different. And part of the reason that Pinal is different is that your starting point for acreage is almost double as compared to what it is in Phoenix. And so any program that you look at in Pinal is naturally going to have a more significant impact when you're thinking about that permanent municipal water use because you have more acres that you can potentially convert. So if we start at 1.5 in Pinal, you can see again, you've got substantially more water use with the program than with the status quo. With 1, you come a little bit closer, but you've still got more under the program than status quo. When we look at 0.5 acre feet per acre for that conversion rate, then you do start seeing some savings. And this is where that replenishment rate might become a little bit more critical. And you might want to look more closely at what a realistic replenishment rate might be expected for the Pinal EMA. So we can kind of look and click through our scenarios for replenishment to better understand what the impact there is on how much conservation could be produced through this program. So I will leave it at that for now. Again, this dashboard is going to be available online. We will be providing the link to this both on our public meetings calendar and also on the council webpage. And I will stop sharing so that we can switch back to the presentation. So let me just double check if I had anything else I was missing. Nope. So with that, I will hand it back to Tom. And we will go back to the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. So I wanted to offer up a few takeaways from Natalie's presentation. First, we've done a lot more analysis than we shared with you in June, but there's still a lot more to be done, right? Natalie's development of this dashboard, I think, is a huge improvement in being able to visually see what the results of these different projections moving forward are, and for all of you to be able to test lots of different scenarios that you may think work well. I think we also show quite readily that just the variables we've thrown out here, the conversion rate and the replenishment, and create a lot of different yet positive outcomes. So I think we have choices in front of us, policy choices, and this tool I think is going to be really helpful in providing the science, the data to make those policy choices. Again, we can get to the same place of incentivizing home building and development and creating benefit for the aquifers from probably different pathways. So we got a lot of questions in the June timeframe. Folks reached out to us to try to go through the complicated data. I think we're happy to do that again, but hopefully this dashboard tool can help all of you do some testing on your own, and then hopefully we can help you fill in the blanks a little bit and explain some of the in-depth assumptions and other things that we've used to come up with this information. So I wanted to move on then. And this is just a recitation of the ag to urban guardrails we talked about earlier, but we actually encapsulated some recommendations that we wanted to throw out there for these ag to urban guardrails. And I've jotted down, it's not on this slide yet, we just didn't have time to do this, but I've jotted down the slide numbers in my presentation from earlier that attach to each one of these boxes. So when we have the discussion, we can go back to those slides if need be. So again, in the first box on the left, which is the land eligibility. Again, we talked about 3 to 5 years irrigation history, and no certificates of assured water supply. In the next box on this slide, development of conservation measures, looking at measures to reduce non-functional water use, non-functional turf, but also lakes as well. And then in the applicability of this being limited to designations, we don't have an additional recommendation at this time. Under the next consumer protections, we had a pretty detailed discussion about how all of that would work. I think you can take that detailed discussion as our recommendations. For program timeframes, we've talked about recommending potential limits on the program. And then for the second to the right box, portability of credits away from ag lands. Again, we are talking about use of water as close to retired ag lands as possible, and we showed you different scenarios, including not moving away from the ag land a mile and a mile plus. And then lastly, on the conversion rates and replenishment, and just generally the recommendation without specific numbers being conversion rates that improve aquifer conditions. Again, next steps, we want to have a broader public process and rulemaking. We still value and need input from the council, but we have heard from stakeholders that are not part of the council or not directly represented. There are many stakeholders who want to be part of a process to look at this ag to urban program. And DWR will initiate that broader stakeholder process. We also believe that we can establish an ag to urban program through rulemaking. And the stakeholder process will inform what needs to go into those rules, especially criteria. And DWR will work with all of you and the stakeholder group on drafting proposed rules and hopefully shepherding through those rules through the process. So we're on to what you're all waiting for, the council discussion, and I want to do this in a sequenced way. First, I'll take comments or questions just generally about the concept, if folks have or want to make comments about just the concept of an ag to urban program. I probably will speak for you all that we all think this is a good program. It is a matter of getting it right. I see lots of head shaking. So then I'll move to kind of the sideboard discussion before we get into the dashboard. So if anyone wants to comment on any of the sideboards, and again, we can go back to those sideboard slides. So anyone have questions or comments about sideboards? Kathy?
Well, this is pretty complicated, so maybe you covered this, but I do have questions about the sideboards. So when you get to protect consumers, you say that all the assured water supply requirements would apply, and I get that, but then is it a given that this will require replenishment by CAGRD? You've talked a lot about replenishment, but it's not clear to me that you're saying that this program will require replenishment by KGRID.
So I think where we left off in the spring, we believe that replenishment is necessary to make this work. You saw a little bit of Natalie's dashboard moving around different replenishment numbers. Certainly the GRD is the prime suspect for doing the replenishment. In my mind, that is where replenishment could be, a program could be the most impactful and with the most certainty, given the resources that the GRD has. We have a lot of work to do with the GRD folks. We've reached out to them a bit about replenishment. A lot of this and the dashboard information is new to them as well. So they've got some heavy lifting to do that we have to work with them. And I will assume they're going to be a member of the stakeholder group If they're not, they're going to get a lot of phone calls anyway, so they might as well be in that room. If there's opportunity for individual water providers to do replenishment, as there is now, then perhaps that's another pathway as well to get actual replenishment done.
So follow-up question to that. That is an existing program that is a requirement for anybody developing on groundwater. And as we've seen with the current draft plan of operation, I guess it's still draft because you haven't approved it, but the board of CAP has approved the plan. It's really clear that renewable water supplies for acquisition for replenishment are becoming more scarce. And in fact, this particular plan suggests that K-Grid will have to dip very heavily into long-term storage credits, possibly, to meet its replenishment obligations. So it seems to me that looking forward, the likelihood of being able to find sources of water to replenish, as well as the requirement to replenish, all need to be balanced. It would not do us any good to allow a lot more groundwater to be pumped and then not to be able to replenish that water. So to me, that is a very big balance. And I would certainly hope that we make sure that we can do this job. So that would be one thing. Another question I have on consumer protection has to do with your statement that the department will not consider exceedances of depth to water limit or unmet demand in the other cells in the consumer protection review. Isn't that a change from existing practice?
If I get this wrong, I got people to fix it. But currently, if there's any unmet demand or exceedances, we're not moving forward.
Correct.
You have to show in the cell that you're going to do the pumping from no exceedances and no depth to water or no unmet demand. So in the other cells, you can still move forward as long as the pumping is coming out of that cell. So that is different than unmet demand and exceedance requirements right now. But you have to balance that with the overall decrease in groundwater pumping over the 100-year time frame that Natalie talked about. So it, as you said earlier, Kathy, is a balancing act with, again, the key point in my mind is you're creating a net benefit at the end of the day to the aquifer. You're still maintaining that strong consumer protection under the program. I wanted to address your earlier comments about replenishment. We did talk under the program timeframe sideboard about potentially coming up with a review period or a sunset date or something that would allow us to do exactly what you're talking about. But I would also be remiss if I don't point out to folks that we do have some renewable water supplies potentially coming online for access by the GRD. And I'll mention a couple of them specifically. The Colorado Indian Tribes' ability to market their water. These are exchanged, their water. In the Northern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement, which is pending in Congress right now, Navajo and Hopi would have the statutory authority to lease the water supplies they're getting in that settlement in the lower basin part of Arizona and in the upper basin part of Arizona. So there are some options out there, right? And we've talked about this a lot, that we're not out of water. There are policy choices to be made. There are water supplies to be accessible. They all have issues to be dealt with there, whether it's the cost, the area of origin, environmental things, all kinds of issues, but it is all part of a package for discussion to move our state forward in a sustainable growth way to avail ourselves of those supplies that are coming online.
I do not want to hog the time here, but because I have lots of questions, so I perhaps should pass the baton to somebody else. But just keep one thing in mind. When you look at the charts that you put up in this dashboard, do you have a part of that increases the buffer? In other words, is this all based on that you can only use the water on the land, the retired irrigated land? Or are there other things that you can pick that show what happens when you start moving the water further and further out?
That's a good question. So what it does is it reflects the utilization of the full volume of that physical availability exemption credit. So whether that was used fully on the land or off the land, it doesn't really consider that. It just contemplates the full volume of that exemption credit being utilized.
Before we get too deep into the discussion, just want to remind everyone to unmute and speak clearly into the mic so everyone online and in the recording can hear you. Thanks.
The senior director in the room yielded her time. Who would like to go next? Joe, and then Sarah.
Thanks. A lot of great information here and obviously a lot of research that was already performed. Under the program timeframe, I know you mentioned sunset that has to still be worked out. Would that be sunset only of future conversions and existing conversions would already be grandfathered?
So there are two different concepts of timeframes that the stakeholder group will probably need to discuss. And one is, what is the length of any particular exemption credit? So is it for 100 years, for example? Is it ongoing or is it for less than 100 years? Then the second would be, for how long is this program in effect? So not necessarily applicable to the length of those credits, but for how long can you relinquish an IGFR in exchange for that credit? So we would still continue to honor any credits that have been issued based on relinquishment, even after that time frame expires, but we would essentially stop issuing new credits.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, because the question was related to the 100-year DAWs, and if there is a sunset that undermined that, but having it as the total credits answers that.
Sarah.
Thank you.
Sharon McDowell, I know, has a question. We'll go to you next, Sharon.
This was a really helpful presentation. I'm very grateful for it. And I look forward to, getting on that dashboard and trying different scenarios. I also appreciate the call out of the Kyle Center's study that we did of water use per acre, and it's on the Arizona Water Blueprint website. It's got a very catchy title like Water and Land Use in Central Arizona. But my question is, with the Maricopa County area moving into the next level of air quality non-attainment, is there consideration for the need to keep applying water or do some kind of, the water use that will be needed for the no longer farmed acres? And is that reflected is it assumed in the dashboard, or is there some way of accounting for it? Certainly we wouldn't want to the Department of Water or Environmental Quality actually has a page that suggests that cover crops are an air quality mitigation factor. So I'm assuming this is an issue.
So Sarah, my understanding of what the different parameters we looked at so far, we've not made an accommodation for that in any of our projections moving forward.
So would there be no water use on currently cultivated acres? We're assuming no water use on those acres. Thanks.
Except you did use some industrial.
Yeah,
conversion.
that's a fair point. So if you think about that status quo scenario, so as ag water use declines over time, we did assume a small portion of those acres would go into industrial uses. And so there was a small factor added in related to industrial water use. But generally kind of for the vacant lands, we assume 0 water use.
We definitely have some more work to do on the industrial projections because we don't have a lot of good data in terms of what that industrial rate might be moving forward. Use some, I think, type 1 conversion data, and I believe that's where we got the data from. So there's more work to be done there. Sharon Megdal, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank you for an excellent presentation. I had some questions of clarification that were somewhat related to one of Kathy Ferris's question. And that is, on your timing slide, you talked about either getting to the depth to 1,000 feet. I assume you're leaving it at 1,100 for the Pinal AMA, is that correct? Or is there an
That's correct,
increase or
Sharon.
change? Yeah, but then it said or unmet demand. And that refers to the unmet demand that's been identified by the modeling. Is that correct? So whichever is the governing limit would be in place. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is in our model, yes. The unmet
Yeah.
demand comes from our model. Models both Pinal and Phoenix AMA.
Yeah. Yeah, you're still talking about the unmet demand that's coming out of the modeling. And then my other question just had to do with, and it's not that important, you know, if Natalie wants to email it later, is I don't really understand what the county parcels overlapping the buffer that became the red, but that's not a big deal. It's just, I didn't understand. Were you keeping it to sections of land or something? I couldn't tell what that was.
So that's actually any parcel, as shown on the county assessor's GIS layers, any parcel that actually intersects in some way or overlaps the one mile buffer off of the IGFRs. I can email you, Sharon, and clarify that further if that's helpful.
So you're not dividing parcels as defined as soon as a buffer goes into a parcel, it includes the whole parcel. Is that what
Correct.
you're saying? Okay. Thank you for those clarifications. I appreciate it. Oh, and Tom, one thing I didn't understand in your response to Kathy's question where you referred to the cell. And again, I can go back and listen to the recording there. It's just trying to understand how you're looking at the limits, but I can go back and listen to that later. Thanks.
And it's the cell in the model.
Yeah.
or the-
Yeah.
the
So you're
cell
going
that's in
down to the
model.
cell level and look at whether you're getting down to the 1,000 feet or not. Is that
Or
right?
unmet demand, yes.
Right. But the unmet demand, you see, that's where I'm still a little confused because the unmet demand you've been saying in the other circumstances is for the whole AMA. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. Maybe I'll need a little tutorial some other time. Thanks.
Well, my model is going to correct me. You're sitting behind me, but I think you compile the unmet demand from each cell to come up with the unmet demand for the whole AMA. Someone behind me said, "Yep, Tom's right again."
Okay, thanks.
Who else would like to speak? Senator Sundaration.
Thank you. And yeah, I'd like to echo the thanks to the department for the additional analysis provided here and the fun dashboard, which I know we're all going to go home and play with because that's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you for all the additional work that we now have a lot more. More structure, I think, to work with this proposal. And I really do appreciate, I think, just the entire layout of the presentation, especially the goals, because I think those are really critical for us to keep in mind as we proceed looking through this and as this takes more shape through a rulemaking is the overall goal of reduction in overall groundwater use, specifically the conversion of ag lands. All of those I think are going to be really important as this proceeds and as we figure out the parameters that make it work in each of the AMAs. I think my questions are somewhat tied to some earlier ones, but I think, Director, you mentioned that on the portability component, there will be lots of divergent views. I think maybe, as I've been looking and go back to those goals, the goal of this whole proposal is to convert agricultural lands. And so I think tying to the kind of almost recommendations at the end of it, where the use should be as close as possible to the retired lands themselves, makes a lot of sense. I think that kind of lends itself to a view that probably portability should be minimized, perhaps not quite the full 1 mile buffer that's been presented in these slides. So I guess the question is really just, that's one of the open for further discussion components that we will be taking a look at over the next couple of years, or not years, sorry, months.
Yes, months.
And then, okay, thanks. So everyone make sure to have their views ready. Okay, and then I think secondly, following on Kathy's question about the replenishment rates, and it was not clear to me as well who the burden of replenishment is on. And I guess the assumption is that it is on the CAGRD. If so, I really absolutely, and I don't know if CAP is prepared at all to discuss it, but would want to know how that lands with that obligation and how easily that's met over the next few years, next few decades, as you've highlighted that replenishment water is not easily available necessarily, maybe so. But that also, I suppose, it's not a foregone conclusion, right, that CAGRD is the replenishment, bears the replenishment obligation. There could be, because one of the structures here is that this program might be limited to designated provider areas. Perhaps it's the designated provider who could pick up that obligation, or perhaps it's the developer seeking to convert. So the question is, I guess, is that another piece that's open for further discussion, is who might bear that burden?
It is open for discussion. We'll hold the question for CAP in abeyance because Spencer was up next. And then if Brenda would like to weigh in, I'll call on Brenda next. Spencer.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry, I've got getting over a little chest issue, so I sound a little hoarse. As it relates to the replenishment, and since replenishment only applies to subdivided lands, how did you credit, if any, replenishment for unsubdivided lands like an industrial in your analysis?
Sure if I understand the question, but just to answer it, and you can let me know if I don't get it.
Let me clarify. So what's the breakdown of water use for replenished land uses versus unreplenished in your analysis?
So I didn't necessarily look at it like that. As we're considering having this kind of be limited to designated providers, it would more be about the total acre foot per acre footprint of that. And so what we really looked at is the full volume available under the program. And for most of those replenishment rate scenarios that you can select, it's just a percentage that potentially then gets replenished on the dashboard. So 0, 33, 67, or 100% being replenished. The exception to that is that we also looked at the 2015 plan of operation and just kind of tacked on the rate of their forecast onto those replenishment obligations. So it didn't necessarily take into account the division of replenished or unreplenished in the way that you say there, Spencer.
Okay. Was effluent considered at all?
So we have looked at and I had meant to pull those numbers, and I apologize that I don't have them in front of me. We had looked at the potential effluent generation associated with these types of What we did not do is then apply that as an offset to the groundwater pumped. The reason we haven't applied that is because as it sits, there hasn't been any proposal or requirement in the program to actually use that effluent to offset the groundwater kind of being grandfathered in here. There's a presumption that that effluent that would then be used for other uses.
Okay, and then just last question, the demand calculator, there were a lot of conversations last year. There's a lot more requirements for water use under that. Has that been looked at, or is there any progress been made on that?
We do have a number of updates in progress for the demand calculator. I am not prepared to give an estimate on when those will publish or a timeline on those today. But what I'll say here is that the demand calculator is specific to certificates. And so kind of under the presumption of what we've presented today, where we're really focusing on designations, the demand calculator really becomes irrelevant to the ag to urban.
One more follow-up. Go ahead.
Well, Spencer, we're not going to stop working on the demand calculator, even though this recommendation is only for designated providers. And we have hired a contractor to help Natalie. We've got some help from the Kyle Center as well on trying to move this forward. So we're not giving up on just letting it lie where it sits today.
If you're limiting this program to designated providers, did you then include all the continued ag pumping that would go on outside designated providers in the data?
We don't have that incorporated into the analysis at this point. The kind of presumption there is that due to ADAS, with this kind of going hand in hand in ADAS, there would be additional providers who would be able to become designated, and this could kind of go hand.
Thanks.
Brenda.
Thank you, Director. First, I'd like to say thank you for the analysis and the ability to look at parameters. Nice job. I think it will be very useful. I think for the GRD and CAP and our responsibilities, it's also very sobering regarding the additional replenishment that could be placed on GRD in the future. We appreciate this process will allow the council to, and the larger stakeholder process. It will give us time to work through all of that. And I think that will be very good. I think we need that, the ability to do that, to work out the important details of how that will work. At CAP and at the GRD, we take our role very seriously. We have been highly successful in supporting a key element of the state's Assured Water Supply Program, and we will continue that important role going forward. I do have to say, though, that given the likely increase in replenishment from ag to urban, diminishing Colorado River supplies, and the heavy responsibilities of acquiring renewable supplies, we will need to be vigilant about placing additional risk on GRD and its current and future members who rely on our continued success. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. Ron.
Thanks, Tom. Ron Doble with NAMWA, and great presentation. I think I already know the answer to this, but I just wanted to confirm it on behalf of some of the folks that I work with. I don't think we looked at the Prescott AMA probably because of the smaller amount of acreage for agriculture there. It couldn't be a beneficial tool for those folks.
So there's kind of two things there. One, exactly your point that there's very little agricultural acreage remaining in the Prescott AMA. But more than that, we were really focusing on these two AMAs that have existing physical availability issues. We're really looking for creative pathways for responsible development in these two AMAs, as compared to the other AMAs that can still go that traditional route.
Okay, thank you.
Paul.
Thank you. And looks like it's going to be a great tool as long as we get everything in it that needs to be in it, right? So a few questions kind of regarding agriculture. One is just to maybe clarify the goal. I've heard what I would say are different visions of what the goal is. And, is it to get rid of irrigated ag, or is it more to limit development to happen on irrigated ag land and thus give value to ag landowners for the water rights that they have?
It's that, it's not to get rid of agriculture per se, but it is to create a program where those folks who have that farmland can get some value and maybe accelerate what otherwise might occur in the course of normal development, and to help achieve the goals of finding a path forward to build homes sustainably, right? And to take advantage of those agricultural water rights that have existed for a pretty long time.
So it would stay voluntary, I'm assuming.
Definitely a voluntary program.
And then I'm curious, when you calculate ag use, does it take into account sort of the net use, like what they apply, but then some of that goes into aquifer recharge or tailwater?
Yeah, so if you think about that status quo and then also the program graphs, the darker blue bars showed the actual demands, the actual pumping, and then there was a light blue bar underneath that showed the incidental recharge. So when we're looking at that kind of green balance, that takes into account the offset from the
Okay.
incidental recharge, yes.
Thank you. And then my last thought is, if it's not required to be used on the land where agriculture was, then that's pretty much buy and dry, right? And I think there's a lot of concerns with that, but one would be the air quality, one would be the impact on the local economy. So.
Others, Warren?
Thanks. I just have some questions. Again, as others have said, appreciate that the department has pulled together all this information, has presented this analysis. It definitely is complicated, like we always like to do with water, and it's going to therefore be really important that we turn each dial exactly in the right way to get the best result. And what I'm assuming is that if one of the guardrails is made maybe even tighter than what is proposed or what has been talked about, then other guardrails maybe don't have to be so tight. And I'm particularly thinking that if, based on what was suggested here today, that this would apply to designated water providers, that then would maybe change how, well, it would definitely have a different impact on CAGRD, and it definitely would have a different impact, I think, in the portability issue, because when you look at the map, there would be fewer irrigated lands next to designated providers or assumed future designated providers. Does that make sense?
Warren, you're making perfect sense. And I think we touched on some of the parameters in Natalie's dashboard, but what I'm hoping we do in the stakeholder group is identify lots of different parameters. Spencer brought up the effluent. We know we need to do some work on the industrial use. Hopefully what we can achieve is a consensus program that works and addresses as many stakeholder concerns as possible. And so I think there is some ability to do that, the way you can mix and match some of these parameters to achieve the outcome we want to achieve.
Thank you. And then could Natalie could you share just a little more of how you are defining status quo?
So status quo is really kind of trying to look at the future for those agricultural lands in the absence of the program. So based on what we've seen in agricultural water use over time, status quo does not mean 100% of today's water uses continue forever. That's not what we've seen in the data over the last 40 years. So the way we look at status quo in the context of the program is looking at those eligible agricultural lands and kind of applying those same decline trends to those lands. What we've seen on agricultural lands is that there is some attrition over time, that there is declines in agricultural water use over time. And so we have rates of that decline kind of built into that status quo scenario. And you could see that with the bars kind of going down over time. Some of that decline is going to be replaced by industrial water uses. Some of it might be lands going fallow. We don't necessarily make judgments about that. What we did was looked at trends related to type 1s, non-irrigation water uses in the AMAs, and applied some of those same trends to estimate some industrial water uses on those fallowed lands. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, I guess I was wondering, like, have you already factored in some things like, if I'm remembering it correctly, 1081 from last session of the Buckeye Irrigation District and how that would then maybe accelerate some of the retirement?
We did not factor in that type of thing at this point, but we could certainly look into it.
So Daniel Schweibert asked by text to speak on behalf of Representative Griffin, who unfortunately couldn't be with us. So Daniel, if you could come up to a microphone or ask one back. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Director. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Schwiebert. I am majority staff at the Arizona House of Representatives. I am here at Representative Gail Griffin's request. She unfortunately was unable to make it due to a personal conflict. She sends her regrets. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. She just asked that I deliver some remarks from her as the chair of the House Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee. She says she has several bill folders open related to the topics discussed today, and she looks forward to introducing those and moving them forward through the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Governor Lewis.
Thank you. And again, thank you for all this great information here. Thank you for everyone for making time to come together for this very important council. Thank you to Governor Hobbs as well. And I'm glad we're getting back to work. And, you know, it's very timely, coming just before, of course, our upcoming meetings in Las Vegas, the CRUA, the Water Users Association, and in preparation for important work that we all know on groundwater next year. And I'm very much appreciated the presentation today, and it gives my team much to review and study. I have our general counsel here, Javier Ramos, and I have Avery White, our council member, who's taking the lead on water as well. Councilman Avery White as well, who's with me. And of course, everyone knows Mr. Don Pongres over in the audience as well. The concept behind today's presentation, as we take it, transferring water uses, of course, from the high intensity farming to the lower intensity domestic uses, it's a very important tool for us in Arizona as we collectively grapple with where our water supplies will be found to sustain our current and future growth. And so the ag to urban concept could be, and I think we all know, will be a critical tool for us in the coming years. And if we use it responsibly to serve both of its fundamental purposes, first, of course, replenishing the state's depleted groundwater supplies, and second, providing new water supplies to help provide water needed for new and affordable housing, critical to Arizona's growth. It's both critical that we keep these purposes firmly in mind as we continue to examine and drill down on this issue and the many goals that we are setting for ourselves around this important table. And I want to provide just a few thoughts on the community's perspective on ag to urban, because many have developed fundamental misunderstandings about the community's views. First, we view this as only one tool among many that will help us develop new water for affordable housing. Others, such as the newly adopted ADOS rule, are equally important, and we cannot look at this as a silver bullet. And second, we're fully supportive of developing the ag to urban concept, provided it meets three fundamental conditions. Whatever we do, first, must be done in an open and transparent manner. And today's meeting and Governor Hobbs' intention to develop this in a public rulemaking are two very good steps in this direction. Whatever we do, it must be based, again, on science and data. Again, today's presentation is another good step in that direction. And finally, whatever we do, we must keep in mind that it will affect us in our discussions and negotiations with others along the Colorado River Basin as we try to establish a framework for the sharing shortages in the next 20 years, as we all know. If we keep to these criteria during the upcoming discussions, for me as governor and my council member Avery White and our leadership, we're confident that we will develop an approach that we can all get behind and support. And I know that our community, the Gila River Indian community, will as well. And again, thank you for holding this meeting today. And we're looking forward to working with all of you in the coming weeks and months. And I know we're trying to have a unified place here in Arizona. And on a more light level, myself and Chairman Miguel, we were on the field on Saturday down at U of A when ASU had a remarkable win against U of A, but we did not spear the field with Sparky's fork, either myself or Chairman Miguel. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, Governor Lewis, I saw somebody do it. I'm not sure who that was. Thanks, Governor Lewis. So we had Joe Singleton, then Sarah Porter again, and then online Jamie Kelly. Joe.
Yeah, I went to U of A and I don't know what game you're talking about. I'd like to echo a lot of other people's thoughts, Tom, and thanking you and your staff for all the work you've done on this concept to get it to this point. I also appreciate that we're looking to approach this process with maybe a bigger stakeholder group that extends beyond the council. I think that's going to make for a better product and a better process. I know in our previous work that I worked with a lot of members of the community that had questions and wanted input into that process. I'm sure a lot of you on the council did too, as well as all of you. So my time and data plan appreciates it because just today I think I'm up to 7 text messages and 3 emails. I had some technical questions kind of on how some of the consumer protection stuff was going to be implemented. They're kind of picky and it's getting late. I would be happy to try to arrange a call with maybe Natalie and run through them. I don't know that I have issue with any of them. I just want to make sure I understand them. And looking forward to working on this. I think it's exciting that it's something that we're looking at.
Thanks, Joe. And we recognize we've thrown a lot of information at everyone today. So I'll have Natalie get in touch with you. So next was Sarah Porter. And then we have Jamie Kelly and Doug Dunham.
Thanks for letting me have a quick second bite at the apple. I think a public process to vet this, to help have a broader understanding and to consider the options is really important. I'm very glad to see it happen. I did want to ask, I want to make sure that we understand that the eligible acres, 139,000 in Phoenix AMA and 245 in Pinal, those must be acres that are within designated providers. Is that correct? Currently?
Those quoted acres were actually the total number of legally irrigable acres in those AMAs.
Okay.
So the number of eligible acres was, I think, 15 or 20% smaller than that. It was not a huge amount smaller than that. I don't remember those numbers off.
Eligible acres were within designated providers.
No.
Okay.
No, that was just the total number of acres within those AMAs.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind is that the irrigation acres that might be eligible for this program would not necessarily be in any designated provider service area. The designated providers don't serve irrigation water. But then also they would be, there may be future designations, for example, under ADAS that could come into play and could utilize this.
Jamie, thanks for your patience. You're up.
Thank you, Director. Thank you to the ADWR for the presentation today. My compliments on the dashboard. It looks like a very interesting tool. I'm going to spend some time playing with it. I am concerned about the replenishment obligation, and if it's CAGRID that's charged with that, its ability to meet that obligation. I acknowledge the Director listed additional water supplies that will be available to meet that obligation. But as we go forward, we need to take into account that meeting that replenishment obligation, increased replenishment obligation, is going to create a burden for CAGRID, and we certainly don't want to see a sacrifice of growth in rural Arizona to meet that replenishment obligation in central Arizona. I look forward to the stakeholder holder group meetings, and I intend to participate. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Doug Dunham, online.
Hey, Tom, thank you. First of all, I wanted to, sorry I missed the opening roll call, but I am here, obviously. Wanted to congratulate the department on getting the ADOS across the line. There was a lot of work went into that. And while no program is perfect, this rarely represents a big step forward for the Assured Water Supply Program and water management in Arizona. And I think back to last summer, the nearly weekly meetings with Warren and everybody else who participated in that, just the amount of work that went into from the council members as well as your staff. I think it's a big congratulations all around the table there. Natalie, excellent job on this dashboard. That's an amazing amount of work. I think the ag to urban is going to be very important moving forward. Look forward to working with everybody on this. While we do support the applicability to designations, as we think about the overarching goal of the program, trying to convert as much ag as soon as possible for the maximizing of water savings, not everybody's going to be designated. There may be a need to include a component for certificates and perhaps with a greater amount of restrictions on it. So I'll just kind of throw that out for consideration. Also, the portability of the water use. It is not always, it's pretty impossible for a water system to say, hey, we're going to just withdraw from one point and serve to only one point. Water moves around in a system, so there's going to have to be a portability component to it. And Tom, I want to echo your comments on the replenishment. That's always been one of the beauties of the GRD is their ability to use shorter term, more limited supplies that are not directly applicable to a designation. And so that provides them a lot more flexibility than a straight designation. And what we have seen historically in the program, designated water providers do everything they can to avoid reliance on the GRD. It's there as backup and kind of the last resort. So I don't think all of this will fall on the shoulders of the GRD. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. Another comment on limitations within a program. We may want to think about, is there the time sunset, calendar years out? Does this just go away? Another thing to think about is if we're trying to encourage participation in this sooner rather than later, is there less replenishment for the initial years and larger replenishment for those acres converted in later years? And another thought along those lines, maybe we look at what a total volumetric participation limit by AMA, something similar to the remedial exemptions that we have. Two questions. Obviously within a designation, when you're coming back in to get redesignated, there's going to be the ability to readdress some of the well locations to address some of those unmet demands. Will this program allow that to continue to happen? Knowing that, you're still trying to preserve and test against the consumer protection piece of that. And then the last question, some of the acreage that you showed, those parcels, did lop across AMA boundaries. I'm assuming that the ability to use these converted water would be limited to the AMA of origin. And with that, I'll listen to what your answers are.
Yes. So the second question, yes, it's limited to the AMA of origin. And now I've totally lost my train of thought on your first question. If you can remind me quickly.
Sure. So well movement coming in to
Oh.
get redesignated. You're demonstrating that there's with your well movements within the model, if that is still allowable under with adding these new lands.
Yes, that would absolutely continue to be allowable within the program. I think what we're trying to avoid in this particular program is having the consumer protection review become a huge modeling exercise. And that's why we're not allowing well movement other than those wells. That's the primary reason, I should say, that we don't want to have well movement other than those that are specific to the project. The other reason, of course, is that it doesn't quite make sense to have movement of wells that can create impacts on third parties when those impacts will not be considered under this exemption. So we really want to limit any sort of well movement in the consumer protection review and the independent modeling work to just be if the water is actually going to be pumped from different wells. For example, if the IGFR was previously served by an irrigation district with wells in one location and then the municipal provider wells are, a few miles away, then we'd want to model that properly.
Understood. Thank you very much. I look forward to working with you all on this in the coming months.
Thanks, Doug. Anyone else? Ed?
By now, you knew I was going to say something before we get done. I want to parrot what Jamie Kelly said, and that is that being in rural Arizona, we sure would appreciate all the respect for the rural water. And I want to say a big thank you to Natalie and Ryan Mitchell, who did a great job in Wilcox presenting something similar in the early November meeting of explaining the situation of the basin. Natalie, this dashboard is amazing, and it took a lot of work, and those kind of things is for us humans, or at least for this dumb old farmer, really helps to be able to see it. So thank you on that. Governor Rowe, I appreciated what you said about technologies and technologies. At the PCAST meeting, Haley and I had been there, and we also got to meet with Inez Fong, who mentioned some of her students developing some new technology. They actually went to Death Valley for spring break, I believe, and survived for 5 days on this little mechanism that they use to develop water. I say that to say that many years ago, we would have all come here in either a horse-drawn buggy or a Model T. Today, our cars have high technology, some of them electric, et cetera, et cetera. You see where I'm going with this. Patrick, if I can quote you, you said in the Wilcox Basin some time ago, if we can save enough water to just get to the new technologies, we'll be okay. And I thought that was one of the wisest things I'd heard said, Patrick, and I'm going to say it here. The same thing goes. If whatever you guys do, I don't understand near as much about this area as I do our areas. But in hearing you and hearing the battles, and my fellow ag person over here, Paul Brierly, and I will, and Matt Bayer over here, we're obviously going to stand in the corner of, we better not give up all our food production for water. And I think all of us realize that. At the same time, one important factor, and I say this for Stacy Trevor's good because she said she loved me the first meeting we started because I made a statement about wanting to use drip irrigation in the Colorado River Basin. I'm going to repeat that. The river water has been almost free. Those of us in groundwater basins are paying a lot of money to pump water. So Ron, we were able to afford, we could make the transition to drip irrigation and sprinkler because we had to. It made sense. It paid. But when water is not valued and it's free or just the distribution of it, then you're not going to see the use of drip irrigation and new technologies, Governor Rowe, that you so talked about. So my thought is we want to protect ag. The way to protect it is push programs, to Gail's point about different bills that come up. Tim Dunn brought us a bill that we could afford some of the drip irrigation, and just 2 weeks ago, we seen 2 of those on different farms out in Pinal County. If we continue to push those kind of things, one thing I've learned is that over 2 million people, and Patrick, that may be the wrong number, but it was a huge number of people have viewed all the articles written on Arizona water. Patrick Sigel, in a meeting with him, he talked about Nigeria and the Chinese using groundwater there. Then Dr. Jeff Silvertooth, U of A, also referred to some worldwide issues. My point is whatever we decide here over the next years, vastly will be viewed by the world because groundwater, as this world heats up and agriculture becomes tougher to develop food. Yes, we need to take care of growth in cities, no doubt. But secondly, we dang sure better take care of our food production. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Tom, for your direction. Natalie, Nicole, always thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Chairman Miguel.
Thank you, Tom. The Auction Indian community is an ag community, as we know, and we're in the heart of ag country and economy, and we must be thoughtful and take care of changes. I appreciate the efforts to be thoughtful and look forward to ongoing conversations as other stakeholders come into the dialogue. In a month, I'm going to be done as a tribal leader, 11 years, 9 of it as chairman for my community. And I just want to extend my appreciation to everybody here and being a part of this board, and to the administration for allowing leaders to be at the table. Governor Lewis, myself, and Chairwoman Flores from the Colorado River Indian Tribe. And we've always expressed the importance of having us at the table to work with you all. And again, so, I'm devoted, and I am truly, truly appreciative of this occurring. As I said in the meeting before, our former leaders, our former tribal leaders who are no longer here with us, I've always known the importance of water to Native people. And to have us at the table, obviously, they are shedding some joyful tears up in heaven, knowing that we are here sitting together, working together to get things done. Now, again, I'm going to be done in about a month, but it doesn't mean I'm completely done. I can come back in 2 years. So hopefully with the support of my people, I can be back in 2 years. And what I want to see, if that occurs, is that we're continuing to sustain and be prosperous with what we're doing here together as far as our water resources, which is obviously the most important resources we have, that we've taken it to another level when I come back, hopefully if my people let me. But again, I appreciate each and every one of you for committing to a dilemma that has occurred in the Southwest as far as water shortage. I know with this team we have here together, and with the help of the tribes, we can prosper. It'll be better as we move forward. So again, thank you guys, each and every one of you. I appreciate you, and of course the governor's administration and team for allowing tribal leaders to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Chairman Miguel, for those 11 years, and also for me. the work you've done with us on the Colorado River, not just on these groundwater issues. And we have big challenges facing us. We need all the stakeholders, tribes, agriculture, cities, industry, developers, home builders. We all need to come together. I think you've all heard me say that many, many times. And I'm really serious about that. There isn't any one group that can do this by themselves. I'm not sure there's even a collection of groups. It's got to be all of us across the board. So thank you again. Anyone else? Cynthia.
So I have a question. Is
I think that is true. I think it could be, and that's certainly something we can discuss further in the stakeholder group.
Could you repeat Cynthia's question? She broke out. We couldn't hear online.
Yep.
Mute button. Need to be green.
So Cynthia Campbell had asked whether whether this exemption, because it applies to designated providers, would apply to all uses or would be restricted to residential uses. And so my response was that, yes, I think that it would apply to all uses for a designated provider, but we could certainly discuss that in more detail in the stakeholder discussions as well.
Thank you.
Representative Travers? Oh, okay. All right. Anyone else? Anyone else online that I can't see? So a quick couple of points of purpose of summary from my perspective. I think we heard, look at the big picture. We need to protect programs that already work. The GRD has been working. We want to make sure we don't kill the GRD and those who are currently relying on it, because there are designated providers that rely on the GRD as well. I've also heard that we want to build on the successful programs. I think we want to recognize the holistic nature of water management in our state and in our region. I think we heard from our some of our agriculture and rural constituents not to harm their future or just for the benefit of kind of the municipal part of Arizona. I think I've heard that we all want this program and the criteria that will be part of the program to be based on good data, sound science. So just put together these things of common ground that we're starting from, I think is a really positive place to move forward from. And I'll just say, I heard from everyone across the board that it is a good thing. I'm going to expand this discussion to a larger group of stakeholders, and DWR will make it known how that process is going to work, when it's going to launch, and how we're going to move that forward. So with that, I'll ask Patrick if he has any closing remarks.
Thanks, Tom. Not too much to add. I just want to agree that I think this is a program that's had a lot of attention, and it seems very simple on its face. And we've seen from the 2-hour discussion today that that's not the case, right? It's a very complicated program that needs the appropriate guardrails attendant to it. And so it's a program that deserves a rigorous public process for stakeholders in this room and elsewhere to have an opportunity to weigh in. And so we're excited to provide that. I just want to thank everyone who came today from across the state to join us here in person. This is an incredibly busy time of the year. I'm sure there are people in this room who are about to head to the airport and head to CRUA. And I also want to extend a lot of gratitude and thanks to the staff at the department. You had staff who were down in Wilcox just last week, or was it week before, and folks working up to and through the holidays to put this really robust and rigorous presentation and data before you all so that we in Arizona can make smart public policy choices related to our water future. And so just incredibly appreciative of the department staff and the dedication that these public servants have to our water policy in Arizona. So thank you. And with that, appreciate everybody for joining us this afternoon.
Well, I don't know, Patrick, how two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom can be so difficult, but they seem to be. So looking forward to seeing you all at CRUA. For those of you that I don't see, happy holidays. We will continue to to move forward with this program. Reach out to folks, let folks who you interact with on a regular basis know the outcome of this meeting. We will post some things on our website to get the message out about the stakeholder process as well. And beyond that, all of you get home safely.